I was 20 years old when I met him, and at that age, everything felt unfinished, my sense of self, my relationships, even my understanding of love. I was already in a relationship then, one that looked steady from the outside. We had history, routines, shared jokes, and plans we talked about more than we actually lived. Nothing was technically wrong, but something was missing, and I didn't yet have the language to explain what it was. He was 23, African, and new to the city. We met in the most ordinary way, the kind of meeting you don't expect to matter later. At first, he was just someone I talked to in passing, someone whose presence felt calm without trying. He listened differently than most people did. When I spoke, he didn't rush to respond. He let silence sit, like it wasn't something to be afraid of. I told myself I didn't notice him in any particular way. Not like that. I had a partner. I was loyal. But there was something about how easy it was to talk to him, how I didn't feel the need to explain myself too much. Our conversation stayed light at first: music, where he was from, what surprised him most about being here. He laughed softly, not loudly, and when he smiled, it felt unguarded. Over time, those conversations stretched longer. We'd talk after everyone else had left, sitting on steps or leaning against railings, letting the night settle around us. He talked about home, about missing familiar sounds and food, about how starting over made him feel both free and invisible. I found myself opening up in return, saying things I hadn't said out loud before. How I sometimes felt like I was playing a version of myself that others expected. How being young didn't always feel exciting, it felt confusing that I didn't tell my partner about these conversations. Not because there was anything obvious to confess, but because I didn't know how to explain why they mattered. That should have been my first warning point. One evening, he asked if I wanted to go out for a bit. Just to ride around, clear our heads. It was already dark, the kind of night where the air feels cooler than you expect. I hesitated, thinking of the message from my partner I hadn't answered yet, then told myself I was overthinking. Friends were allowed to exist. I said yes. That we found a bike near the corner. He looked at me, then handed it over with a small smile. "You ride the bike," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I laughed nervously, surprised by the trust in such a simple gesture. He sat behind me, steadying the seat, telling me he'd guide me if I needed it. As we started moving, the city felt different. Quieter. The streetlights blurred slightly as we picked up speed, and the sound of the tires against the road became a rhythm. I was aware of him behind me, not touching, not close enough to cross any obvious line, but present. His voice came from just over my shoulder, calm and encouraging, telling me when to slow down. When the road curved, I felt strangely safe, and that scared me. We didn't talk much while riding. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. My thoughts, though, were loud. I thought about my partner, about how I hadn't felt this light in a while. I told myself it was just the night, just the movement, just the novelty of doing something different. But deep down, I knew it wasn't only that. When we finally stopped, I put my feet down and laughed, my heart racing. He smiled again, that same quiet smile, and thanked me like I'd done him a favor. We stood there for a moment, the bike between us, the city humming softly around us. Nothing happened. No touch, no confession, no dramatic moment you could point to and call a mistake, but something had already shifted. On the walk back, I felt a weight settle in my chest. Not regret exactly, but awareness. I had enjoyed the night in a way that felt private, almost secret. I realized I was already rehearsing how I'd describe it later, keeping it casual, leaving details out, making it smaller than it felt. That's when it hit me: infidelity doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as comfort, as understanding, as a moment where you feel seen in a way you didn't know you were missing. I went home that night with the city still echoing in my ears, knowing that even though nothing had happened, something had begun. After that night, I told myself I would create distance. I believed it, too. I answered his messages slower, convinced myself I was just busy, that life was naturally pulling us in different directions. But emotional lines, once blurred, don't snap back into place so easily. They stretch quietly, almost patiently, waiting for you to forget where they were drawn in the first place. When we did talk again, it felt both familiar and different. There was an unspoken awareness between us, like we were both careful not to name something that didn't need a label to exist. He asked how I was, really, and the word really lingered. I hesitated before answering, aware of how easily I could fall into that honesty again. And still, I did. He told me about his family back home, about the expectations placed on him and how moving away had given him space to breathe. He spoke about identity in a way that wasn't dramatic or rehearsed. Just truth, laid out gently. I listened, feeling the weight of being trusted with parts of him few people here knew. That kind of trust creates intimacy long before anyone realizes what it's becoming. That my relationship back home began to feel louder by comparison. Conversations that once felt comfortable now felt rushed. I caught myself withholding, not arguments or facts, but feelings. When my partner asked how my day was, I gave summaries instead of stories. I told myself I was protecting the relationship, but the truth was harder to face. I was protecting something else. Another night, we ended up walking together, no destination in mind. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, and everything felt suspended, like time had slowed just enough for thoughts to catch up with feelings. He didn't try to move closer. He didn't need to. The closeness was already there, in the way our steps matched, in how easily our conversation flowed back into silence. At one point, he stopped and looked at me. Not intensely, not dramatically, just a look that asked a question without words. My heart sped up, not with excitement, but with recognition. This was the moment where things could change. Where a line could be crossed in a way that couldn't be uncrossed. I thought of my partner then. Of the version of me they believed they knew. Of the trust they had never questioned. I realized how unfair it was that I was standing here, balancing honesty against desire, while they remained unaware of the quiet distance growing between us. I stepped back, creating space where there hadn't been any seconds before. I smiled, said something casual, something that redirected the moment. He nodded, understanding immediately. There was no disappointment in his expression, only acceptance. That somehow made it harder. We sat on a low wall instead, talking about small things again, music, plans, places we wanted to visit someday. But the tone had changed. It was softer, more careful. Like we were both holding something fragile and pretending it wasn't there. Later, alone, the guilt finally caught up with me. I replayed every conversation, every look, every pause. I hadn't kissed him. I hadn't touched him. I hadn't said anything explicitly wrong. And yet, I knew I had already betrayed something important. Emotional honesty had been redirected. Intimacy had been shared in the wrong place. I wondered when exactly it had happened. Was it the bike ride? The late-night conversations? Or was it earlier, when I chose not to mention his name at all? The realization settled heavily: infidelity doesn't begin with an act. It begins with a shift in where you feel most understood. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing I was standing between two truths. One was comfortable and familiar, rooted in commitment and history. The other was new, fragile, and dangerous, not because it promised more, but because it revealed what was missing, and the hardest part was admitting that stepping away now didn't erase what had already been felt. In the days that followed, I became quieter. Not just with him, but with everyone. It felt like the safest way to carry something I didn't yet know how to set down. When he reached out, I still responded, but the conversation stayed closer to the surface. I asked about his classes, his work, the weather, things that didn't invite confession. He noticed, of course. He always had. But he didn't push, and that restraint felt like its own kind of kindness. My relationship didn't survive untouched. Even though nothing physical had happened, the shift inside me showed itself in subtle ways. I was less present, less patient. I listened, but my mind wandered. My partner sensed it, asking if everything was okay, if something had changed. I told them I was just tired, just stressed, just figuring things out. None of that was a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I thought about telling them. Not the details, not his name, but the fact that I had felt something I wasn't supposed to feel. Each time I imagined the conversation, I felt the weight of it, the hurt it might cause, the questions I wouldn't be able to answer cleanly. I realized that confession, when it's meant to ease your own guilt, can sometimes be another form of selfishness. So I stayed silent and turned inward instead. With distance, clarity began to form. I understood that what drew me to him wasn't just attraction or curiosity. It was the way he saw me without expectations, the way he listened without trying to fix or define me. That wasn't really about him at all. It was about something I had been missing, and not addressing, in my own relationship and within myself. Eventually, our paths separated naturally. He became busier. I made myself unavailable. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final conversation that wrapped everything up neatly. Just a gradual fading, like a song lowering in volume until you realize it's ended. When I think of him now, it's with gratitude rather than longing. He was a mirror, not a destination. My relationship changed too. It didn't end immediately, but it couldn't return to what it had been. Once you recognize a truth, you can't unknow it. I tried to be more honest, more present, but I also knew that staying required more than effort, it required alignment. In time, we let each other go, gently, with respect for what we had shared and acceptance of what we could no longer be. Looking back, I don't define that period of my life by guilt or shame. I see it as a lesson I needed at 20, when everything still felt unfinished. I learned that loyalty isn't only about what you do with your body, but about where you place your emotional truth. I learned that feeling seen can be intoxicating, and that it comes with responsibility. That night ride, the quiet conversations, the choice to step back, all of it taught me something I carry with me still. Infidelity doesn't always leave scars you can point to. Sometimes it leaves awareness instead, asking you to grow before you're ready. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this: the moments that don't cross the line can still change you. And what matters most is not pretending they didn't, but choosing what you do with that knowledge afterward.